Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled financial coach, and I'm so glad that you're here to join us today on the podcast. I'm going to start today by telling you about my thesis that I wrote when I was in graduate school. My thesis was about pulling conductors or wires through a PVC conduit, and specifically through a 90-degree elbow. And I was studying the difference between pulling dry wires through versus ones that had something on them to reduce friction. I also was practicing putting these little rollers. Maybe I could make an invention where there's an elbow with little rollers or some sort of mechanical way of reducing friction for pulling the wire through. And I was going to take the results and scale them up so that it could be used as a reference or as a supportive study for something that could make pulling feeder conductors on either like power plants or buildings a little bit easier. It was something that I was pretty passionate about studying. My major professor, bless his heart, he hadn't done any like major experiments and he didn't have any background on something like this when it came to research. He did a lot more thesis reports where you do research and then you write about the research as opposed to you conduct an experiment and then write about the experiment. I mean, both involve research, but the experiment covers more credit hours, and it takes a great deal of background to do experimental design correctly. I did learn quite a bit about how to design an experiment through the process. It was quite educational for me. But this particular project was no small feat. I ended up writing I think over 450 odd some pages. This thing was huge. I didn't know how long the paper was going to be when I started. I was hoping that I had narrowed the scope down, that I could keep it in and around 200 pages at max. But the amount of data that I had collected bolstered the paper to quite the size. Let's take a few steps back before we dive into the actual story of writing the paper. Imagine freshman me, anxious, going from homeschooled to college. Class of one to a class of everyone. And it's something that I'm nervous about. I want to do really well. Anytime I get a homework assignment, I do it right away. I'm like 2 weeks ahead on doing my homework all freshman year. And that was just the way that I operated. I wanted to make sure that I was ahead of anything that was given to me so that I would never get behind. I would never stress out. I would never be like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to get this thing done before the due date. But as time went along, I became less anxious about what I was being given in school. I became less anxious about having to get things done because, while I got used to some homework assignments being so easy, they didn't take that much time. There wasn't a reason other than my stress level to get it done 2 weeks in advance. At least that's how I was processing it. I used it as a rationalization to procrastinate more and more. By the time I rolled around on my fourth and fifth year is when I had to start the thesis, I was probably doing more than half of my stuff the night before it was due. That was not a healthy way to operate. I lost more and more sleep as I went from being 2 weeks ahead to 24 hours ahead or less on my homework assignments. The thing about homework assignments that I was given is most of them were genuinely small. They were things that you could do in a day or two. If they were big, it would take like 2 to 3 days. But you could work one late night and pull out something decent on an even moderate assignment and do okay if you really learned the materials and took good notes in class. But the thesis was going to be different. I couldn't procrastinate an entire academic year and then in one semester put together an experiment, run the data, process the data, and write the paper. It was just not something that could be done. There's a series of memes that I've seen, little graphs, and it's like the level of an engineering student's productivity or an engineer's productivity or a college student's productivity, and it's like flat until the night before the deadline, and the curve on productivity goes up to astronomical or infinite right up to the deadline, and that's kind of how procrastinating functions when it comes to inspiration. It reminds me of the Calvin and Hobbes comic where Hobbes is asking Calvin, hey, when are you going to work on that paper? When are you going to get that assignment done? And he's like, oh, you can't rush the creative process. You got to wait for the right inspiration. And what inspiration is that? Last minute panic. I knew I couldn't do that on this. Just intellectually, I knew I couldn't do it. And I needed a plan. I needed to actually sit down and map out, okay, what are the parts and pieces that need to get done and by when? I started on a non-granular level. I looked at the big picture. I broke it up into basically 4 pieces. The first piece was going to be building the experiment. I figured I could do this the summer before I really needed to start getting stuff done for the project. Then, after that summer, I was going to be able to run the experiment and process the data. And my goal in doing that was, well, once all the data is in front of me, I'll still have a semester, maybe a little more than a semester, to actually write the paper, because I would need some time to process the data and figure out what my results were before I could really write about them. I ended up building the experiment when I was interning in Utah for the job that I had when I was out there. I think that was the summer of 2017. And I remember I had a number of places I lived. That's a story for another day. But I went to the hardware store and I bought the 2x4s, I bought the screws, I bought my first power tool, I bought the conduit and the wires, and was like fabricating all of the little bits and pieces, and I made it modular so I could take it apart. It ended up being like 7 foot in one direction and 7 foot in the other direction on both sides of the elbow. And I ended up coming up with all sorts of fun little ways to pull the wire at a consistent way, varying the speed so I could isolate variables. It was really fun. I ended up getting the bulk of what needed built on that summer, and then I assembled it in my parents' garage at the start of the academic year in order to run the experiment. Running the experiment was a lot more time consuming than I expected. I remember getting homework done, getting assignments done, and then spending almost every bit of free time that I could getting down on one knee on one end of the project, setting up the experiment, going to the other end, running a power drill, and then, recording the results. And I was recording everything on my phone. My phone was looking at this analog gauge, and it was recording videos of all the data for every run, and I would do them iteratively. It took forever. I ended up needing some help. Shout out to my friend in California, Travis, who wrote a program that could look at the videos of those gauges and translate that into spreadsheet material on a graph for the amount of force that was actually on the wire, on the conductor when it was being pulled. I could not have processed the data without your help, Travis, and I'm still in your debt for the help that you've given me. I ended up wrapping up processing the data and running the experiment with only a semester left. I was a little behind my initial plan, and the last stage of actually writing the paper needed to be broken up into parts. So I outlined what the paper was going to be and said, okay, I need to make it this far in the paper by this time, this far by this time, this far by this time. And if data was still needing to be processed, or I was still thinking about what the implications of the results were, I could still write about the experimental design. I could still take pictures and get the figures in there and get the formatting right and figure out, okay, how does a thesis need to be structured for the final submission? By spacing out what I needed to do and when on the big scale and then individually on the smaller scales to make sure I didn't fall too far behind, I was able to realistically finish a 450-page paper. It was an incredible accomplishment, and it wasn't something that I had to cram the night before. I just progressively walked through the last couple weeks, submitted the paper, defended it, and I knew my stuff. The defense went really well. I was able to answer pretty much any and every question that was brought to me on it. The results, if you don't want to look up the paper and read through the whole thing, were that adding the rollers introduced more factors to pulling the wire, and in a number of circumstances actually made pulling the wire through the elbow worse. And that was interesting. I gave reasons for how an experiment could be designed better and where stuff could be studied in the future on this topic. And I'm hoping that maybe someone picks it up or cites that paper. It's not just something that's archived on Kansas State University's website. It's still one of the things that I'm most proud of having done, even if it is now a giant stack of paper. With that, let's move on to today's budget tip. Today's budget tip is to track your medical bills that you expect. Like you go to the doctor, checkup, let's say annual checkup, or you go to the dentist and you know they're going to send you a bill down the line and it's going to exceed the copay. You know, you had your copay, but if you have a particular percentage that you're responsible for that's not covered by your insurance or you haven't hit your deductible, they'll send you a bill. Medical bills are notorious for taking a long time to reach your door. I had one medical bill recently that was associated with the birth of my son, and the hospital didn't end up getting us that until nearly a year after he was born. I remember we got the bill and we just were kind of flabbergasted that it had taken that long. And it was one that we weren't quite expecting. It had been so long ago. So when you have something done, medically speaking, budget for it the next month and say, okay, I expect, if it's a routine checkup, those historically have costed X number of dollars. We'll put that in the budget. And if it doesn't show up and you don't end up needing to spend the money on that, well, roll it into the next month and roll it into the next month until that bill comes through, or you get evidence that insurance covered it and you didn't realize that it was solely their responsibility. This is going to help you not get surprised by something that could be a significant bill and really throw off your budget. When we got the one, we had to sit down and basically redo the entirety of how that month was going to be structured around having received that bill and having it come due right then and there. I hope that helps you as you continue to budget. Now it's time to answer a question submitted by you. Today's question comes from Brett. Brett asks, why are not all potato meals created equal? How come a baked potato is more expensive to buy at a restaurant than French fries, when French fries require more work and special tools to create them? Well, I'm not a restaurateur and I'm not an expert in the culinary field, but I do know my way around the kitchen a little bit. And it's a really funny question. It's something that I've liked to think about a little bit. French fries, they require a deep fat fryer. You could make French fries at home, sure, in the oven, but you're not going to ever be able to recreate McDonald's French fries. McDonald's popularized French fries as a side because potatoes are relatively cheap for a restaurant. And if they install a fat fryer, it's something that they can kick out fast, and it's something that they can do on the cheap. And it's something that most people aren't going to be making in the kitchen. So it makes quite the nice draw. You drop the price of that, and all of a sudden you have quite the attractive product for people to come and buy. Now, a baked potato, on the other hand, that's something that you can make at home quite easily. You could do it in the oven, or you could even make a nice baked potato in the microwave. I've done that. But how's a restaurant going to sell a baked potato? They're not going to come and say, okay, would you like the 50-cent, 75-cent baked potato? And you're going to be like, that doesn't cost enough. But a thing of French fries at McDonald's, kind of what you're getting into, and the price point's low. That's what you're expecting, and almost everybody's had a McDonald's French fry. But with the baked potato, if you mark it up, and let's say you have like a catered meal or a baked potato bar, well, you're going to probably try to make it fancier and produce a bunch of toppings and things that people don't normally prepare at home. And you're going to make it kind of like this special thing. And by raising the price, you're going to raise the perception of that particular product. And it's really a shrewd way for a restaurant to look at the inexpensive potato and mark it up by quite a bit more. It's a weird thing we have in our psychology. It's a good thing to note about yourself. When you see something that's more expensive and you're comparing things that are alike, like potato products, you look at the baked potato and you say, well, this baked potato over here costs $8. Meanwhile, the French fries over here cost like $1 or $2. You're probably going to think that the baked potato is the more refined product, even though it's still just a potato. By just putting a bigger price tag on it, even if it's ridiculous for the raw potato component of it, you're going to perceive that it's something of higher value just because it's got a bigger sticker on it. Eating out, in my opinion, is more a form of entertainment than it is a form of necessary sustenance. When I go out to eat and I'm looking over the menu, I typically pick something that I wouldn't normally make at home, or something that I couldn't make at home. Many times this is going to be leaning towards some sort of seafood that I don't feel comfortable making, or something that I've never heard of, or something that does require a special tool that they have back there in their restaurant kitchen that I don't have at home. That way I can get a variety of experience from the food itself, and I'm not just going to the restaurant to buy something that I could make at home for less. I want to try to maximize my perceived value of what I'm getting. And so I will lean on something. If they're selling French fries at the sit-down place, and I really like their French fries and I can't make French fries like that at home, I'll probably order that and save them difference on it than what they might upcharge for a baked potato. With that, we're going to move on to today's main topic. So today's main topic is going to be more or less an introduction into the next phase of the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. For the first 4 episodes, I focused on frugality, the intentional practice of prudent economy. Since then, I've primarily focused on debt. Other than a few interviews that I've been able to work in between, I've been talking a lot about debt, credit cards, getting out of debt, things of that nature. We're going to shift our focus now to more of the planning aspect. Just like I talked about in the story, it took a great deal of planning and intentionality and discipline for me to successfully get my thesis done in the allotted time I had. It was a major undertaking writing that paper. And there are a lot of things in our life that we would look at and say, that's a goal. That's the dream. That is what I would want. And some of them feel pretty significant. Some pretty lofty goals might be, the dream home, or the dream car, or the dream job, the dream career, whatever it is that you look at and you're like, okay, this is something that matters to me. Some of our wants and desires and goals can be embodied in our core values and what donations or giving or service that we can engage with if we just had our act together, we were out of debt, we were financially independent. If you didn't have to work for money, where would that money be going? What does your heart say that you should be doing with your money? Well, the answers to these questions typically embody our values, dreams, and goals, no matter how you shake it. And if you want to see those come to fruition, if you want to see them become a reality, it takes planning to get there. If you worked for a company, let's say you worked for a company and you were responsible for managing the money in the company. Let's use the same one I use in my financial class for teenagers, high schoolers. I talk in that class about a company, a YouTube channel that squishes stuff. I call it Pressed for Views. Imagine a company that squishes things with a hydraulic press. I know that the YouTube channels are out there where people do squish things with a hydraulic press, and it's very entertaining for the teens to think about it, but I digress. The guy who's running it, who hired you to manage the money, goes, okay, what's the plan? How much do we have for advertising? How much do we have for buying a new hydraulic press? How much do we have to buy stuff to squish? How much are we going to be able to pay people? And you go, I don't really know. We're just going to kind of wing it. We're just going to go with it. We're going to, we're just going to see how it shakes out. It'll be okay. Well, we'll spend the money where we want it, as we go. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'll watch it. It'll be cool. Well, more than likely, you're probably going to get fired if that's your answer as the chief financial officer. Another way to think about it is, if that was your answer, would you fire you? When we have something that matters, like running a company or a dream, a goal, something that we value, something at our core that we want to see come to reality, that something needs a plan. And to come up with that plan, we need to be specific. Let's consider a goal where you're saving for your kids' college. You want to save up enough money to pay for all of their academic education. You have to be specific. You say, I want to save for my kids' education. Well, are we saving for trade school? Are we saving for a 4-year university? Are we saving for them to be able to go out of state? Or is your limitation for them going to be, well, you can afford in-state, and anything out beyond that is going to be on you? How much do you need to save for them? You need to kind of think about what you would like to give them in that capacity. And you could come up with a dollar figure based on that, looking at some of the universities around you or the trade schools, whatever it is that you are going to want to be able to support for your child. You also have to be concerned about when they need the money for their education, if that's your goal. You need to ask yourself, okay, they're this old now. By when would they be going to trade school or the university? When would they be engaging with their academics that are going to be costing the money that you would like to provide to them for that? And if you can say, okay, how much do they need at the end? When they want it? Okay, you've been specific about what you're saving for and how much. You know when they need it. Well, you can then break that down into how much do I need to be saving for my kid every month in order to pay for it. And you can look at that number and go, ooh, that's a lot, or that's really not that bad. There are some savings goals, especially if you start early on, even though the final amount is huge, where you don't really have to save that much per month, especially if you want to invest the money and take advantage of compound interest and the power that you can get out of compound interest when saving for a really big goal that's more than 5 years out in the future. Almost every goal that we could have, be it saving for a kid's college, the car, the dream home, a wedding, no matter what the goal is, more often than not, money is going to be a component for it. I used a very specific financial goal there, but let's say your goal is to lose weight. Well, if you want to lose weight, part of losing weight is going to involve dieting and exercise. Are you going to be leaning on free ways to exercise, like going on a walk, going on a run? If you have a bicycle, you don't need to pay to ride your bicycle. Or are you going to be looking at getting a personal trainer and getting a paid gym membership, something where you have access to equipment that you don't otherwise have? Because if that's the way that you're going to motivate yourself is through paid means, well, you need to make sure that you have the money to accomplish that goal. In the dieting part, you're going to need to know if you're buying more expensive, healthier food for yourself, how much more you need to be spending on it. And if you need to cut back from somewhere like eating out in order to afford the healthier, greener food from the grocery store, like what's that going to entail? Are you going to be able to manage that every month? Ultimately, money touches, either directly or indirectly, almost every meaningful goal that we have in life. It only makes sense to me that in order to make anything that matters to us come to fruition, come to reality, well, we need a plan for our money. We need to make sure that when we are assigning discretionary funds to a particular goal, that we're not sacrificing another goal that takes a higher priority or something that we feel is more of an essential. Planning, in effect, is a priority if you want to make something that you wish for, a goal, come true. A dream without a plan is just a wish, but a dream with a plan is a goal. And when we prioritize a plan for our money, I like to think of that as the most powerful priority that we can put forward because it impacts everything else that we want to do. So if we come up with a plan for our money that touches all of our other plans, our other priorities, the powerful priority is what I like to call it. The powerful priority is the plan for your money. And you won't know what you're sacrificing for any one of your individual goals or dreams unless you are very organized with your powerful priority, unless you're giving all of your money individual missions and you're assigning all of it to where it needs to go. That way, if you have something you want to change, if your goals shift, if you need to be putting more money toward a particular goal, you can intentionally take away from other expenses, other savings or other giving in your life so that you can apply the priority where it's appropriate. And when we stay on top of the powerful priority, when we stay on top of our money and our plan for our money, instead of experiencing like the last minute panic and trying to scramble and put things together last minute or when there's an emergency, we can just kind of walk through our goals and not experience that having to get it done overnight the night before or the stress of, oh, I didn't get it done. Just like with the thesis and the homework. In full disclosure, the powerful priority is just another name for the budget. In particular, the zero-based budget, which is what we're going to be talking about next week. I've made reference to the zero-based budget before. Next week's podcast on Tuesday is going to be all about a deep dive into budgeting, where I dig into the nuances that make budgeting confusing, especially when you're just getting started. And I'm going to hopefully simplify what budgeting is so that you can see it as a way that you can grab more control and freedom over your money, your life, your dreams, and your goals. A budget is not something that restricts you. A budget is something that frees you to be the best version of yourself. And it allows you to make your money nothing more than a tool that helps you be more of who you already are. I'm really excited for this episode next week. I really am. And I hope today has inspired you to listen to the episode next week and pursue budgeting yourself if it's not something that you're already after. And until next week, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.